Hello and welcome back to the Tarantula Cave. My name is Martin and this is my 5 reasons for keeping tarantulas.
Reason number 1.
Tarantulas are ridiculously easy to keep. Very low cost in terms of electricity because you don't need to heat their enclosure. Very low cost in terms of the enclosure itself because you can use jars, you can use display cases, you can use old fish tanks. The list of things that you could keep a tarantula in is pretty much endless. Most tarantula species available in the hobby have very similar care. You don't need to be an expert unless you're going to do something really specialist with a particularly rare species that not many people have and you're really trying to breed it, then you might need to know a bit more. But basically, tarantulas need an enclosure with ventilation, a water dish, some substrate, a hide or more substrate that the tarantula can make a burrow in, and some kind of food. In terms of that food, tarantulas only eat very infrequently, so an adult tarantula can go easily a month without eating. Younger slings will probably need to eat every few days, but overall, in terms of the amount of effort you're going to spend in looking after that animal, it's tiny compared to most other pets you can keep. This is my Poecilotheria subfusca lowland, and he lives in this. And he loves it in here. It's perfect for him. Is it the nicest looking display in the whole world? No. Do I get to see him on a regular basis? Yes. Is it a problem from a husbandry perspective? Not at all.
Reason number 2.
Tarantulas are also incredibly good value for money. So if you want to keep a huge tarantula, like a salmon pink bird eater, there are species out there that get huge and they produce hundreds if not thousands of eggs in every egg sac. What that means is that the hobby gets completely flooded with lots of spiderlings of those species. Certainly in the UK and I know in the States, if you want to get hold of a salmon pink bird eater sling, then that's going to cost you a couple of dollars, a couple of quid, something like that. If you buy more than one, then you'll get a bulk deal, so actually the price will come down from that, which is crazy. And you're talking about a spider that ultimately will be basically the size of your hand. So if that's not good value, I don't know what is. Also, that spider, if it's female, could live well over 20 years. If it's a male, it might make it 3, 4, 5, but even then, you've spent kind of £2 to have an animal that's going to live for years, that needs very little care, and is going to blow most people's minds when they see it.
Reason number 3.
Because tarantulas don't take up a lot of space, you can have a lot of species, you can take your pick from the huge variety of tarantulas out there, and have as many of them as you can fit into whatever designated space you have. So if in your house you have a sideboard that has space for a nice terrarium with a tarantula in it, you can do that. If you're lucky like me and you have a whole room full of shelving where you can put lots of tarantulas in jars and small containers, then you can have a lot. I currently have about 35. I'm probably not going to get too many more than that just for my own personal feelings on husbandry, but I know people who have 150, 200. It's easily done, and because they don't take huge amounts of care, if you have enough time to look after that many spiders, it's much easier to look after 200 tarantulas, than it is to look after 200 snakes, than it is to look after 200 guinea pigs. Whatever it is you've got that isn't tarantulas, it's definitely harder to look after than the same number of tarantulas, and it definitely takes more space, unless you're really into woodlice.
Reason number 4.
There is a tarantula for every type of keeper. So basically, if you're into arboreals, there's a lot of arboreal species that live in trees. If you're into terrestrial species, then there's tons of terrestrial species that live on the ground or in shelters on the ground. There are obligate burrowers that live underground. So that's 3 different areas that you can really get into depending on what your interest is and how often you want to see it. From my perspective, if you don't really want to see your tarantulas that often, then obligate burrowers are definitely the way to go, because you might get to see some hairy front legs, and that's probably about it most of the time. Most of my arboreal tarantulas are out all the time. I just see them resting on the front of their cork bark. Likewise, the terrestrial ones are also out a lot of the time. It's not just the way those tarantulas live, there's so much variety of colour, everything from kind of plain brown, plain grey, up to kind of insanely deep blue with yellow markings, or the classic kind of, there's so many actually, kind of black and orange, varying patterns of black and orange. Beautiful, just tarantulas are beautiful. So depending on what you want from a pet, you can get that. Similarly, in terms of their personality, if you like, I hate using that word for invertebrates, but yes, personality, there are some species that are much more defensive and hence much more of an adrenaline rush if you're going to keep those, because they're going to push you harder as a keeper. And then there's the other end of the spectrum where there are species that in general are much more docile, very unlikely to give you a threat pose, very unlikely to ever bite you. And if you're into not having urticating hairs kicked all over you, then there are plenty of species that don't have urticating hairs, so you don't have to worry about that. But then a lot of those are kind of old world, so they might be more defensive. But there is a tarantula to suit every person, I believe, and that includes arachnophobes, because a lot of people in the hobby got into the hobby through being afraid of spiders and tarantulas, and trying to overcome that fear by bringing something like that into their lives, and kind of generating a relationship, creating a relationship with those animals, so that the fear goes out the window because you suddenly have a responsibility instead. And then the more you see how the animal behaves, the less frightening it becomes. This ties into something that's very deep-seated in how I feel about wildlife in general, and the misconceptions of people's phobias for things like snakes and spiders and scorpions and all these things. It's all about knowledge. The more you know about an animal, the more you know about something that you're afraid of, the less scary it becomes automatically. This is a fact.
Reason number 5.
Tarantulas are biologically fascinating. They breathe from book lungs located underneath their abdomens. They have sex by the male transferring sperm to the underside of the female with his frontmost legs. They grow by climbing out of their old skin. They produce silk, and they use that silk in all kinds of ways. So before they molt, they make a silk mat to molt on. Often they can build like dirt walls with silk and dirt to block off their hides. Some tarantulas just live in their silk. They just make a huge amount of silk and they live in there. They can live underground, they can live up in the trees. They eat a huge variety of things, from tiny lizards to birds in some rare cases, to, you know, all kinds of insects, other spiders, anything that they can catch. Some tarantulas are known to eat fish. And I think like the probably one of the most amazing things, and the reason that people should at least get some slings, is that tarantulas can grow from being really, really tiny, like so small, to being huge. And if that's not amazing, I don't know what is. So there you have it, my top 5 reasons for keeping tarantulas. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please give it a thumbs up below. If you are new to this channel, then please subscribe. If you want to get notifications of future videos, you're going to have to also hit the bell icon, otherwise you're not going to get those. I post videos once or twice a week, sometimes even more. I should do a quick shout out to Tarantula Kat. I'm going to post a link to her awesome YouTube channel below, because it was her suggestion that those of us in the Tarantula YouTube community do this type of video. And other than that, all I can say is if you're already a subscriber or you're watching right now, then thank you so much for your support. I really appreciate you taking the time to watch this video, and I will see you in the next one.